Parish council last year, two hotheads got together and really locked horns. It was ugly, although some people found it amusing. And a question we all need to ask ourselves when relationships go wrong is, what impact is this conflict having on Jesus' reputation? This is how we're meant to think as disciples. Because as Christians, albeit sinful, weak, broken ones, messed up ones, we all need to find ways to honour God. People do actually watch us, don't they, when we take the name Christian? They look at our behaviour. But if, by God's help, we respond with love and self-control when provoked or insulted, we may actually gain an opportunity to speak about Jesus to others. We may surprise people around us by providing evidence of God's power and presence in our lives. Alternatively, like those in that parish council meeting, if we simply attack others, our reputation and God's name could be shot to pieces. Sands, in his book, talks about the ABC of conflict. I really like this. He argues that it's not so much about going through the conflict as growing through the conflict. He calls that ABC, adversity builds character. And I believe that that is true. Conflict provides an opportunity for us to grow into greater Christ-likeness. I might say that again. It helps us to become more like Jesus, doesn't it? Adversity builds Christ-like character. Sands argues that it's not so much about going through conflict as growing through conflict. Conflict provides us that amazing opportunity to grow to be more like the Jesus we love. God's ultimate purpose for us is not to make us healthy or wealthy. It's not to make us happy or to have all of our rights defended. No, God's ultimate purpose for each one of us as Christians is to make us more like His Son, Jesus Christ. To do this, He'll use people. He'll use our circumstances. He'll use fights and arguments and situations to expose weaknesses in our character. Maybe to expose sinful attitudes or even sinful habits. I don't know about you, but I know in myself, pride, selfishness, and jealousy very quickly rise to the surface when I'm provoked. And when they do, the best response is to cry, "Help me, God." He is that faithful one that we've just been singing about, isn't He? He's always there to help us. I guess every one of us this morning would readily say that we want to love God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our mind, and with all of our strength. It's the second bit of that great commandment that's the hard one, isn't it? Love our neighbour as ourselves. I do puzzle over why God didn't say, love your neighbour the way you love your husband or the way you love your wife. Love your neighbour the way you love your mom or your dad or your best friend. Something to ponder. I'd suggest that we're often very selective in our love. We're selective lovers and not equal opportunity dispensers of love and care and concern. And the good news is that God knows what we're made of. He knows that we're frail. He knows that we're messed up, human and selfish. And yet He loves us. But He also loves the other person we're in conflict with. God's love for that other person has to impact how we see them, how we view them, how we treat them. Our Christian brothers and sisters are not actually our enemy, but we do have an enemy who we are told prowls around, seeking who he will devour. My experience is that Satan loves to piggyback situations and create havoc in relations. We're coming into land, but I do want to share about a major disagreement I had with a colleague in Ethiopia. We were working in an Orthodox context, which is a bit like a Muslim context, way up in the north of the country. And my colleague was more willing to accept traditional practices than I was. I had a very black and white view of things, while he could embrace more grey. I thought I was biblical and he wasn't. It got very personal, which wasn't helped by the fact that he actually looked like a guy I had once dated. And that hadn't been a good relationship. It was only when I fully grasped God's love for this other person that I was able to handle things better. I was able to let go of being right. I was able to let go of being biblical. We are determined as colleagues that we would work on this relationship and try to sort things out. And so we committed to work together every week over a coffee. It wasn't hard because Ethiopian coffee, as some of you may know, is absolutely fabulous. We committed to listening to each other and to speaking positively to each other and about each other. And every time we met, I reminded myself that God loved this man, that Jesus died for this man. I also reminded myself that God doesn't have favorites, although I've always felt like I am one of God's favorites. We both acknowledged God's sovereignty over our team and over our ministry, and that by Jesus all things were created in heaven and on earth, and that through him he holds all things together. Jesus was really our hope in that mess. And by depending on Jesus, by trusting in him to lead us through our differences and to hold all things together, we actually made progress. Some coffee times were more comfortable than others. But by God's help, we did work it out, and I learned to embrace more grey. We're still friends. We're in touch by email. Actually, even this morning, I had an email from him and his wife. I pray for him and his family every Thursday. As Christians, we do have a resource outside of ourselves to help us through the conflicts, to help us through those troubled relationships. And conflict is an opportunity for us to grow. Conflict is an opportunity for us to draw on Jesus' goodness and on his power. Next time our feelings get hurt or we disagree, let's remember that God is watching over us, and he's watching over that person that we're fighting with. He watches over us all with an unending love and with unlimited power. I'm going to finish with a few questions for us to ponder as we head in to this week. Are we facing any conflict in these days? And how might putting God first, making him our focus in this situation, change our approach to that trouble? How might putting God first change our thinking or even our feelings? And what changes would we make going forward? Tough one, but a good one, I think.
Let's all stand just to respond with some worship.
There is a Redeemer Jesus.